My name is Ethan Miller, and on Christmas morning I watched my younger sister smile like she had just won the world when she opened a small velvet box and found a silver key inside. My parents clapped. My mother wiped tears from her eyes and whispered, "Someday you will understand," but I already understood because I was the one who quietly saved the house they were about to lose. I was 19 when I learned how invisible you can become inside your own family, and that Christmas was the moment it finally hurt enough to matter. Before I continue story, please subscribe my channel. The morning felt familiar in every predictable way. The smell of cinnamon and sugar drifting from the kitchen, old holiday music humming from the battered radio. My dad refused to replace the same tall pine tree, leaning slightly to the left, overloaded with ornaments that carried more history than value. I had driven in late the night before to our home in rural Ohio with a car full of gifts and a heart stupid enough to believe things might change this year. My sister Emily was already there, of course. She always was. She had been living with my parents again for the past few months after another plan fell apart. She called it a transition period. My parents called it temporary. I called it permanent. Her old bedroom looked exactly the same. Posters from high school still on the walls, notebooks scattered across the bed, filled with half-written ideas, while my parents tiptoed around her moods like they were fragile glass. When I walked in, my mom hugged me quickly and said, "We were worried you might not make it with your work schedule." The message underneath was clear. Emily never had conflicts. Emily always belonged here. I smiled and said, "Of course I came. It's Christmas." My dad came out of his office moments later wearing the same old sweatshirt he had owned forever. He smiled, but his attention drifted quickly back to Emily telling him about a creative project she was excited about. He listened like it was the most important thing in the world. Dinner the night before had followed the same script. Emily talked, mom worried, dad encouraged. When they asked about me, I gave the safe answers. Work was good, busy, but good. They nodded politely and moved on like my life was background noise. I went to bed early and sat on the edge of the guest room bed, staring at the wrapped frame in my suitcase, the one thing I thought would finally make them see me. 3 months earlier, I had come home to help clean the attic and found envelopes shoved behind boxes, final notices, warnings for closure letters. My chest went cold. The house was weeks from being taken. My dad's business had been failing quietly, and my mom's medical bills were piling up. They told no one, especially not me. I had money. I worked hard, saved harder, and lived simply. I paid the full amount without telling them. The bank barely hesitated. The house became safe again, and no one knew except me. I framed the deed, wrapped it carefully, and waited for Christmas, thinking maybe this would change everything. But now, on Christmas morning, my sister was crying tears of joy, holding up a key. My parents told her about the small house they bought her near downtown, perfect for inspiration, perfect for her future. I felt something crack inside my chest as I realized what had happened. They saved her with money they did not have, while I saved them without being asked or thanked. When my dad reached under the tree and picked up my gift, smiling and guessing what it might be, I knew the moment was coming. And I also knew this Christmas was about to destroy the story my family had been pretending to live in. The next thing my father Reed would turn celebration into silence and finally force the truth into the open. My father tore the wrapping paper like a kid excited about a surprise, smiling wide until the frame slipped into view. The smile drained slowly as his eyes scanned the document. My mother leaned closer, confused, then stiffened. My sister stopped breathing for a second, like the room had lost air. "What is this?" my dad asked quietly. "It's the deed," I said. My voice sounded calm, even to me, like it belonged to someone else. The room froze. Christmas music kept playing softly in the background, completely unaware that everything had just shifted. The deed to this house, my father whispered. How did you get this? I found the letters in the attic. I said the foreclosure notices, the final warnings. I paid it off in September. My mother sat down hard on the couch like her legs had given up. Paid it off. She repeated, $206,000. I said the house is yours. Free and clear. Silence pressed in from all sides. My sister stared at me, then at our parents, then back at the silver key, still in her hand. You told me everything was fine, she said to my dad. You said the business loan covered it. My dad looked at the floor. There was no business loan, he admitted quietly. My chest tightened, because hearing it out loud made it real. The truth had teeth. I stepped forward. You were 3 months from losing this house, but you bought Emily a new one anyway. My mom shook her head. She needed stability. She needs room to grow. And I didn't. I asked. The words slipped out sharper than I meant. My sister finally spoke. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't. I believe you, I said, because I did. But that didn't make it hurt less. My dad stood, suddenly defensive. You had no right going through our papers. I had every right. I shot back. I am your son, and you were drowning. The argument exploded, then years of silence cracking open. My mother cried, my father justified, my sister looked trapped between guilt and confusion. They admitted it piece by piece. Retirement money, borrowed insurance, cashed out, pride holding everything together with lies. I watched my parents unravel and felt something unexpected, not triumph, not anger, just grief for the years we lost pretending. My sister set the key on the table. I don't want it, she said, not like this, don't be dramatic. My dad snapped, it's not drama. She said, it's truth. You were willing to lose your home for me because we thought you needed us, my mom said. And I didn't, I asked quietly. That landed harder than yelling ever could. My mother looked at me, then really looked like she was seeing someone new. You were always fine. She whispered. No, I wasn't. I said I was just quiet. The room cracked open, then not with shouting, but with honesty. My sister admitted she hated being the fragile one. My dad admitted fear controlled everything. My mom admitted sickness she had hidden. And me, I admitted how lonely success felt when no one cared enough to ask. We sat there for hours. Christmas dinner, forgotten. The tree lights blinking over a family breaking and rebuilding in the same breath. By the time daylight faded, we had decisions to make. Sell the house they bought, her face, the debt together. No more secrets. My sister looked at me. Sorry, she said, for not seeing you. I nodded. That was enough. When we finally stood, my father asked one question that mattered. What happens now? I looked at all of them and answered honestly. Now we stop pretending. But I didn't yet realize that telling the truth was only the beginning, and that rebuilding a family hurts far more than breaking one. The days after Christmas felt heavier than the argument itself, like the air had thickened, and every movement required more effort. We stayed in the house together because no one knew how to leave without making it worse. The silence was not empty anymore. It was full of things finally acknowledged. My sister avoided my eyes at first, not out of guilt, but confusion, like she was trying to understand who she was without the role she had been given. My parents moved through the house, slowly, speaking carefully, as if the walls might overhear and judge them on. The third morning, my mother sat at the kitchen table, holding her coffee with both hands. Her fingers shook slightly, and for once, she did not try to hide it. I noticed, because I was finally allowed to see. There is something else, she said quietly, something I should have told you both a long time ago. My father stiffened. My sister leaned forward. I stayed still, already sensing the pattern. The doctors, she continued, they were not routine visits. I have been seeing a specialist for months. The tests are expensive, and the answers are unclear. The word she avoided hovered in the room like everyone knew it, but no one wanted to give it shape. My father looked broken in a way I had never seen before. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I didn't want to be another problem," she said. "Because I thought I could handle it alone." I felt something shift inside me, that familiar anger mixed with understanding. Same instinct that kept all of us silent had been guiding her too. "That is exactly the problem," I said. "We keep trying to be strong alone, and all it does is tear us apart." My sister moved to her side and took her hand. "I want to know," she said. "Even if it's scary." That moment felt like a line being crossed. Not backward, but forward. Later that afternoon, we talked numbers, not accusations, just facts. The house they bought, my sister, would go on the market. Immediately, the money would stabilize my parents' future and create a fund for medical care. I would be paid back partially, not because I demanded it, because they insisted. My father finally admitted the business had failed years ago. Pride had been louder than reason. He agreed to close it officially and start over without pretending. That night we ate takeout on paper plates in the living room and laughed awkwardly at the mess. It was the first honest laughter we had shared in years. The weeks that followed were uncomfortable and necessary. My sister took a job at a local bookstore. She stopped pretending her art had to carry her entire identity. My parents attended appointments together, and I stayed longer than planned, learning how to exist in the house without armor. For the first time, my family asked about my life and waited for real answers. I told them about the pressure, the therapy, the nights I felt like success was hollow. They listened without fixing, without dismissing. One night, my sister admitted something that surprised me. She said getting that key terrified her. It felt like being pushed out, not supported, like independence had been forced on her before she was ready. I realized then we had both been trapped just in opposite cages. By spring, the house she never lived in was sold. The check was divided cleanly and transparently. No secrets, no shame. When I returned to my apartment, something had changed. I started calling home, not out of obligation, but connection. I allowed myself to need them. Healing did not feel like relief. It felt like learning to walk differently after years of limping. And just when I thought the hardest part was behind us, another truth surfaced, one that would test whether this honesty could actually survive. Fear. The phone call that came next would prove whether we were truly changing or just pretending again. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. I recognized the hospital number immediately. My stomach tightened before I even answered. "It's your mom. The nurse said she wants you here." I drove without thinking. The road blurred under gray sky, and every old fear tried to crawl back into my chest. The familiar urge to stay calm, stay useful, stay distant, try to take control. When I reached the hospital, my sister was already there. Her face was pale but steady. She looked at me, and for the first time did not try to pretend. She was fine. The diagnosis was confirmed, early stage, but real, manageable, but permanent. No more maybes. My father sat in the chair beside the bed, holding my mother's hand like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. She looked at me and smiled. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said. "You didn't want us to know at all." I replied gently. She nodded. That was when I realized how deeply silence had been mistaken for strength in our family. The weeks after that were structured around schedules, medications, appointments, adjustments. My sister and I took turns. My father learned routines he never thought he would need to know, and I learned something harder: how to stay without fixing. There were moments I wanted to retreat back into being capable and distant, but every time I stayed present instead, the weight lifted just a little. My sister struggled too. She confessed one night that she felt guilty for years of support and terrified of being needed differently. Now, you are allowed to grow, I told her, and you are allowed to fail. Without being rescued, she cried, then not because of sadness but relief. As summer approached, something surprising happened. We became ordinary in the best way. We argued over groceries, we shared dumb jokes, we sat together in silence that did not feel dangerous. One evening, my father admitted something. While watering the garden, I always thought being a good parent meant protecting you from hardship. He said, sometimes it means trusting us with the truth. I replied. He nodded slowly. That summer, I invited them to my apartment. For the first time, not for a holiday, not for a crisis, just dinner. I expected nerves, perfection, planning old habits. Instead, I cooked something simple, left dishes in the sink, and let the mess exist. My mother commented on the view. My sister teased me about my furniture. My dad asked real questions about my work. It felt strange and right. Later, my sister pulled me aside. I used to think you didn't need us, she said. Now, I know, you just didn't want to ask. Neither did you, I answered. That night, after they left, I stood in my quiet apartment and felt something new, not pride, not control, but belonging. But healing is not linear. And just when things felt steady, another moment arrived that tested whether we could forgive the past fully. What my father confessed next forced me to decide whether truth alone was enough to heal what years of favoritism had broken. The confession came quietly, which somehow made it worse. We were sitting on the back porch, late evening, cicadas buzzing like static in the air. My sister had gone inside to help Mom, and it was just me and my father watching the sky dim. He didn't look at me when he spoke. I need to tell you something I've never admitted even to myself. I waited. I had learned silence was sometimes the most honest invitation. When you were kids, he said, I worried about you more. I turned to him, surprised. You didn't cry much, you didn't ask for help, you handled disappointment like an adult. Even when you weren't one, I thought, if I leaned on you too much, you would disappear into responsibility and never come back to us. My chest tightened so. Instead, I leaned on your sister. I let her need me because it made me feel useful. It made me feel like I was still doing something right. I felt anger rise, but it didn't explode. It settled heavy and sad. You chose her because she made you feel needed. I said yes, he admitted, and I told myself you were fine because I needed to believe that. For the first time, I saw my father not as the man who favored, but as the man who feared losing control, losing relevance, losing his place. It doesn't excuse it. I said, I know, he replied, but I want you to understand it. We sat there a long time. The truth didn't fix anything, but it loosened something inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Old memories replayed. Every time I achieved something quietly, every time praise came wrapped in distance. But something was different. This time the pain didn't isolate me. It connected me to my younger self and gave him compassion instead of criticism. The next morning, I told my parents something I had never said out loud. I told them I was tired of being strong. My mother cried. My father apologized again. But this time it wasn't desperate. It was steady. My sister joined us later, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then said something I didn't expect. I thought you were lucky, she said. I thought you got freedom while I got supervision. I didn't realize freedom without connection feels like exile. That sentence stayed with me in the months that followed. We practiced forgiveness, not as a single act, but as repetition. We corrected each other gently. We asked before assuming. We failed and tried again. My mother started physical therapy. My father attended support groups. My sister kept her job and wrote without pressure. I kept therapy and let my family see the messy parts. We stopped celebrating perfection and started acknowledging effort. At Thanksgiving, we skipped traditions and made new ones. We talked openly about boundaries, money, fear, love. There were awkward moments, but no explosions. One night, My sister handed me a notebook. She had written about us, about roles and damage and growth. She said writing it helped her understand that being protected too much had limited her as much as being ignored had limited me. I told her she was brave. She told me I was too. For the first time, those words felt equal by winter. Something inside our family had stabilized, not fixed, but grounded. We weren't pretending anymore. And when Christmas approached again, I felt something I had never felt before. Calm, no rehearsed expectations, no hidden gifts, no secrets waiting to detonate, just people choosing honesty over comfort. But the real test came on Christmas morning, when I realized I wanted to give them something symbolic, not money, not security, but a reminder of what we survived. What I placed under the tree that year carried no value on paper, but would define our family forever. Christmas morning arrived quietly. Snow dusted the street outside, and the house felt warmer than it ever had before, not because of the heater, but because nothing was being held back. We gathered around the tree without rush. No one was performing happiness. We were just present. I handed them the gift. Last, it was a simple wooden box. Inside were 4 letters, one for each of us. I asked them to read silently. First, in my letter, I wrote about the boy who learned early that love came with conditions, about how being dependable became my armor and my prison. I wrote that I forgave them, not because the pain disappeared, but because I refused to let it define who I became. My mother's letter spoke of fear, disguised as control, of loving too tightly and trusting too little. She wrote that illness had stripped away her illusions of self-sacrifice and shown her how deeply she needed us too. My father's letter was the hardest for him. He admitted that masculinity had taught him usefulness was love, that when he felt unnecessary, he withdrew. He wrote that he was learning to stay, even when he could not fix anything. My sister's letter made us all cry. She wrote that being chosen had felt like love, until it felt like pressure, that she envied my distance, because it looked like freedom. She thanked me for surviving in silence and still coming back. We read, and then we hugged, not the stiff kind, but the kind that lasts long enough to change something later. We cooked together, messy, loud, imperfect. That afternoon, we took a walk, as a family, no destination, no roles, just movement side by side. I realized then that healing did not mean erasing the past. It meant understanding it deeply enough to stop repeating it. We still have disagreements, we still fall into old patterns sometimes, but now someone notices, and someone speaks, and someone listens. The house no longer feels like a place where silence wins. When I packed leave the next day, my father helped carry my bag. My mother reminded me to call when I arrived. My sister slipped a note into my pocket on the drive home. I opened it. It said, "Thank you for staying long enough for us to change." I pulled over and cried, not from sadness but release, because for the first time in my life, I knew I was not loved for what I provided, but for who I was, and that changed everything.